Sarah pushed her stroller through the crowded subway platform, her 6-month-old daughter, Emma, sleeping peacefully despite the noise and chaos around them. It was just another Tuesday morning in the city, another day of juggling her part-time job at the coffee shop with single motherhood, another day of trying to make ends meet while her ex-husband lived his new life across the country. The platform was packed with commuters, everyone in their own world, staring at phones or straight ahead with that vacant look people get when they're just trying to survive another day. That's when Sarah noticed the man in the wheelchair near the edge of the platform, struggling to reach something he'd dropped on the ground. He was maybe in his 40s, wearing a faded jacket, and from the strain on his face, Sarah could tell he was in pain. She watched as person after person walked right past him, some actually stepping over what he was trying to reach without even glancing down. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked if he needed help. Nobody seemed to care that this man was clearly struggling. Sarah felt her chest tighten with that familiar anger at how cruel the world could be, how easily people could ignore suffering when acknowledging it might inconvenience them for even a moment. She started pushing the stroller toward him, weaving through the crowd, when Emma suddenly woke up and started making these soft, cooing sounds. Not crying, just these gentle, almost musical sounds that Sarah had never heard her make before. The man looked up at the sound and his eyes met Sarah's, and she saw something in them that broke her heart, a mixture of pain and resignation, and something else, something like hope that had almost given up on existing. Sarah reached him and bent down to pick up what he'd dropped, a worn wallet with pictures visible through the clear plastic, and when she handed it to him, he thanked her with a voice rough from years of struggling. Emma's cooing got louder, more insistent, and the baby reached her tiny hands toward the man with a focus that seemed impossible for someone so young. The man smiled, that sad kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes, and said something about how beautiful Emma was. Sarah thanked him and was about to move on when Emma started making sounds like she was upset, squirming in her stroller, reaching toward the man with such determination that Sarah couldn't ignore it. She'd never seen her daughter act this way before, so insistent, so focused on someone, without really thinking about it. Sarah found herself asking the man if Emma could touch his hand, explaining that her daughter seemed really drawn to him, and she didn't know why. The man looked surprised but extended his hand, probably thinking it was the strangest request he'd gotten all day. Emma's tiny fingers wrapped around one of his fingers, and the man started to say something about how strong her grip was, when suddenly his entire body went rigid. His eyes widened and his mouth opened, but no sound came out. And for a terrible moment, Sarah thought something was horribly wrong, that her daughter had somehow hurt this man who was already suffering enough. She tried to pull Emma's hand away, but the baby's grip was impossibly strong, stronger than any infant should be, and the man was staring at his legs with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. He whispered something Sarah couldn't hear over the noise of the platform. Then louder. He said he could feel his legs, actually feel them for the first time in 3 years. Sarah didn't understand what was happening, didn't understand why Emma was still holding onto his finger with that iron grip, didn't understand why the man was crying now, tears streaming down his face as he kept saying he could feel his legs. Other people were starting to notice now, starting to form a circle around them, phones coming out to record whatever was happening. Emma finally let go and immediately fell asleep. Just dropped off like she'd used up every bit of energy she had, and the man in the wheelchair was moving his legs, actually moving them, flexing his feet and bending his knees while people gasped and someone shouted that this was impossible. Sarah stood there in shock as the man slowly, carefully, stood up from his wheelchair for the first time in years, wobbling at first but standing, actually standing on his own 2 feet. The crowd erupted in noise, some people crying, some cheering, everyone talking at once and trying to get closer, and Sarah just grabbed the stroller and pushed through them, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. She made it onto the train just as the doors were closing, leaving behind the chaos and the questions, and the man who was standing now, who was walking now, because somehow her baby daughter had done something impossible. Sarah spent the entire ride home shaking, looking down at Emma sleeping so peacefully like she hadn't just completely shattered everything Sarah thought she understood about the world. When she got home to her tiny apartment, she put Emma in her crib and sat on the floor beside it, watching her daughter sleep and trying to process what had happened. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe the man had been faking his paralysis. Maybe there was some rational explanation that didn't involve her 6-month-old baby having healing powers. But she knew what she'd seen, knew how strong Emma's grip had been, knew that the man's tears and shock had been real. Sarah didn't sleep that night, just sat there watching Emma and wondering what this meant, what she was supposed to do with this knowledge, whether she should tell anyone or keep it secret. By morning, the videos were everywhere. Someone had posted the footage online and it had gone viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments arguing about whether it was real or fake or a publicity stunt. Sarah's face was partially visible in some of the videos, and she spent the morning in panic, wondering if someone would identify her, if people would come looking for her and Emma. She called in sick to work and stayed home, curtains drawn, phone off, trying to figure out what to do. Emma woke up that morning like nothing had happened, happy and babbling and reaching for her mother. And Sarah held her close and cried because she had no idea how to protect her daughter from what was coming. The knocking started around noon, gentle at first, then more insistent, voices calling through the door asking if this was where the miracle baby lived. Sarah didn't answer, just held Emma and stayed silent until they finally went away. But they kept coming back, different people, different voices, all wanting something from a 6-month-old baby who'd somehow healed a paralyzed man. By the 3rd day, Sarah knew she couldn't hide forever. The building manager had already called twice asking about the people showing up, and Sarah could hear the suspicion in her voice, the judgment. She needed to leave, needed to take Emma somewhere safe, but she had almost no money and nowhere to go. Her parents had cut her off when she got pregnant. Her ex-husband wouldn't return her calls, and she didn't have friends close enough to ask for help with something like this. That evening, there was a different kind of knock. More professional, more official. Sarah looked through the peephole and saw a woman in an expensive suit, holding a briefcase and a bouquet of flowers. The woman introduced herself as Dr. Patricia Chen said she was a researcher studying unusual medical phenomena and that she just wanted to talk. Sarah knew she shouldn't open the door, but something about the woman's voice was calm and reasonable, and Sarah was so tired of being scared and alone. She opened the door with the chain still on, and Dr. Chen smiled. Not the predatory smile Sarah had been expecting, but something genuine that made Sarah's defenses crack just a little. Dr. Chen explained that she'd seen the videos, that she'd done extensive research trying to understand what happened, and that she believed Emma might have a very rare genetic condition that allowed her to influence cellular regeneration in others through physical contact. She spoke in careful scientific terms, but what Sarah heard was someone trying to make sense of the impossible, trying to give a rational framework to something that defied all logic. Dr. Chen said she worked for a private research facility that studied cases like this, that they could help Sarah understand Emma's ability and keep her safe from people who might want to exploit her. Sarah wanted to slam the door, wanted to tell this woman to leave them alone, but the word safe echoed in her mind because that was all she wanted. All she'd ever wanted was to keep Emma safe. She let Dr. Chen in, and they talked for hours while Emma played on her blanket, occasionally reaching toward Dr. Chen with those same purposeful movements she'd shown toward the man in the wheelchair. Dr. Chen explained that if Emma's ability was real and not some elaborate hoax or coincidence, she would need help learning to control it, because uncontrolled healing abilities could be dangerous for Emma herself, draining her energy or worse. She painted a picture of a future where Emma could help people, could make a real difference in the world, but only if she was protected and properly trained. Sarah listened and felt the weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders, because keeping Emma hidden meant denying her the chance to help others, but exposing her meant risking everything. That night, after Dr. Chen left with a promise to return with more information, Sarah lay awake again and wondered what kind of mother she was, what kind of person she was, to even consider trusting a stranger with her daughter's secret. But she also knew she couldn't do this alone, couldn't protect Emma from the world by herself, couldn't even begin to understand what her daughter was capable of, or what she needed. The next morning, Sarah woke up to Emma crying in a way she'd never cried before, not hungry or tired or uncomfortable, but like she was in pain. Sarah picked her up and felt how hot she was, fever burning through her small body, and panic seized Sarah's throat. She called 911, but before the ambulance arrived, Emma reached up and touched Sarah's cheek with her tiny hand. and Sarah felt a warmth spread through her body, felt her own aches and exhaustion and the headache she'd been nursing for days all disappear. Emma's fever broke immediately, and she smiled up at her mother, like she'd just done the most natural thing in the world. Sarah understood then that Emma's gift wasn't just about healing others. It was part of who she was, as natural as breathing, and trying to suppress it would be like trying to stop a river from flowing. When the ambulance arrived, Sarah sent them away, saying Emma's fever had broken, and she sat there holding her daughter and making a decision. She called Dr. Chen and said she wanted to learn more, wanted to understand how to help Emma, but on her terms, with her present for every step, with full control over who got access to her daughter. Dr. Chen agreed, and over the next few weeks, she came to Sarah's apartment with medical equipment and researchers who were respectful and careful, who treated Emma like a child first and a subject of study second. They discovered that Emma's ability activated most strongly when she sensed pain or suffering in others, that it seemed to be triggered by empathy rather than conscious control, and that it did drain her energy, leaving her exhausted after significant healings. They found that Emma couldn't heal everything, couldn't cure cancer or reverse aging, but she could repair damaged nerves and broken bones and torn tissues with a touch. The researchers wanted to publish their findings, wanted to share this discovery with the world, but Sarah refused, knowing that the world would never leave them alone if they knew the truth. Dr. Chen accepted this with more grace than Sarah expected, saying that protecting Emma was more important than scientific glory. But the secret couldn't last forever, because people who'd been healed didn't stay quiet. The man from the wheelchair, whose name was Marcus, had been trying to find Sarah for weeks, wanting to thank her, wanting to know how to contact the miracle baby who'd given him his life back. He'd been injured in a car accident 3 years ago. Doctors had told him he'd never walk again, and now he was running, actually running for the first time since the accident. He told everyone who would listen about Emma, about the baby who'd healed him with a touch, and while most people thought he was crazy or lying, some believed him. Those believers started showing up at Sarah's building again, but this time Sarah was ready. She'd taken Dr. Chen's advice and moved to a more secure building, had hired a lawyer to protect Emma's privacy, had started putting systems in place to handle the attention that she knew would only grow. But she also made a choice that surprised even herself. She decided that Emma shouldn't be hidden away completely, that if her daughter had this gift, it should be used to help people, carefully and on Sarah's terms. She worked with Dr. Chen to create a program where once a month, Emma could meet with someone who was suffering, someone carefully vetted and chosen, someone whose life could be changed by what Emma could do. The first person they chose was a young girl named Lily, who'd been in a car accident similar to Marcus's, whose parents had spent every penny they had on treatments that didn't work, who'd been told by doctors that their daughter would never walk again. Sarah brought Emma to meet Lily at Dr. Chen's facility, and when Emma touched the girl's hand, the same thing happened. That rigid stillness followed by tears and shock, and the impossible sight of legs that had been dead for months suddenly moving again. Lily's parents sobbed and thanked Sarah over and over, and Sarah felt something shift in her chest, felt the fear and uncertainty give way to something else, something like purpose. They continued these monthly sessions for a year, each time choosing someone different, someone whose suffering Emma could ease. Word spread in quiet circles, not viral videos this time, but whispered stories among people who needed hope, who'd exhausted every other option. Sarah kept careful control over who had access to Emma, turned away people who seemed more interested in fame or money than in genuine healing, protected her daughter from those who would exploit her gift. Emma grew into a toddler, then a child, and her ability grew with her, became stronger and more controlled. By the time she was 3, she could activate her healing deliberately instead of just reacting to others' pain. Though Sarah noticed that it still drained her daughter, still left Emma exhausted and pale after significant healings. Dr. Chen's research suggested that Emma's ability would stabilize as she got older, that her body would adapt to the energy requirements, but nobody really knew, because nobody had ever studied someone like Emma before. The attention never completely went away, and there were hard times when Sarah questioned every choice she'd made. There were protesters outside Dr. Chen's facility claiming that Emma was unnatural, that her ability was against God's will. There were others who tried to kidnap Emma, who believed that studying her could unlock healing powers for everyone, who didn't care that she was a child who needed protection and normalcy. Sarah hired security, moved 3 more times, changed Emma's appearance with different haircuts and glasses, did everything she could to give her daughter as normal a life as possible while accepting that Emma would never be fully normal. But there were also moments that made it all worthwhile, like when Emma was 5 and they visited Marcus, who'd gotten married and had a son of his own, and named the boy after Sarah because he said she'd given him his life back by letting Emma help him. Or when Lily, who Emma had healed at age 2, graduated high school and came to thank Emma in person, walking across the stage on legs that doctors had sworn would never work again. These moments reminded Sarah why she'd made the choices she did, why she'd decided to let Emma use her gift instead of hiding it away. Emma knew from an early age that she was different, that she could do things other people couldn't. But Sarah made sure her daughter understood that her ability didn't define her, that she was valuable as a person regardless of what she could or couldn't do for others. They talked about consent and boundaries, about how Emma never had to heal anyone she didn't want to, about how her body belonged to her and nobody had the right to demand she use her gift. These conversations were harder than Sarah had imagined, trying to explain complex ideas about bodily autonomy to a child who was still learning to tie her shoes. But she knew they were necessary. When Emma turned 7, she came to Sarah and said she wanted to stop the monthly healing sessions for a while, that she was tired and wanted to just be a normal kid. Sarah's first instinct was to worry about all the people they'd be turning away, all the suffering they could prevent. But she looked at her daughter's exhausted eyes and knew what she had to do. She told Emma they would stop immediately, that her health and happiness were more important than anything else, and they canceled every scheduled session without explanation. The backlash was immediate and harsh. People who'd been waiting for months or years to see Emma sent angry messages, accused Sarah of being selfish, said that Emma had a moral obligation to use her gift. Dr. Chen warned that cutting off the sessions completely might draw more unwanted attention than maintaining them, that people were less likely to cause problems if they thought they had a chance of accessing Emma's healing. But Sarah held firm, because her daughter needed a break and that was all that mattered. They spent 6 months living quietly, Emma going to a private school under an assumed name, playing with friends who had no idea what she could do, being just another kid for the first time in her life. Sarah watched her daughter laugh and play and argue about homework, and felt relief flood through her because this was what she'd wanted all along, for Emma to have a childhood that wasn't defined by being special or different or gifted. But Emma started showing signs of restlessness around the 6-month mark, started asking about the people they used to help, whether they were okay, whether anyone else had been able to help them. Sarah realized that her daughter's empathy, the same empathy that activated her healing ability, made it hard for Emma to fully turn away from suffering when she knew she could do something about it. They had long conversations about balance and self-care and how helping others couldn't come at the cost of destroying yourself, concepts that were hard enough for adults to grasp and nearly impossible for a 7-year-old. Eventually they compromised, resuming the healing sessions but at a slower pace, only twice a year instead of monthly, and only for cases where Emma personally felt called to help after reviewing the stories. This gave Emma control over her own gift in a way she'd never had before, let her be an active participant in the decisions, rather than a tool that others wielded. The years passed, and Emma grew into a thoughtful, careful child who understood the weight of what she could do and chose to use her ability sparingly, but intentionally. She healed a firefighter who'd been paralyzed, saving children from a burning building, a teacher who'd lost the use of her hands in an accident and couldn't imagine life without being able to write on a chalkboard, a young musician whose injured fingers meant he'd never play guitar again. Each healing was a choice Emma made herself. Each one left her tired but fulfilled, and Sarah watched her daughter navigate the impossible balance between gift and burden with more grace than most adults could manage. When Emma turned 12, she told Sarah she wanted to meet Marcus's son, the boy who'd been named after Sarah, and when they met, Emma and the boy became friends in that easy way that children do. He knew nothing about what Emma had done for his father, just knew her as a cool older kid who listened to good music and didn't talk down to him. Sarah watched them interact and felt a profound gratitude that Emma had found someone she could be normal around, someone who saw her as just Emma and nothing more. But normal was always temporary for them. always fragile. When Emma was 13, someone leaked her location to a group that believed children with abilities like hers should be studied by the government, that their gifts were too dangerous to be left in private hands. Men in dark suits showed up at their home with badges and legal documents, claiming they had the authority to take Emma into protective custody for evaluation. Sarah's lawyer fought them. Dr. Chen testified on Emma's behalf, and Marcus showed up with a crowd of people Emma had healed over the years, all of them standing between these men and the girl who'd given them their lives back. The standoff lasted 3 days, made national news, became a flashpoint for debates about governmental authority and individual rights, and what society owed to people with extraordinary abilities. In the end, the courts ruled in Sarah's favor, establishing precedent that Emma's ability didn't strip her of her rights as a minor child, that she couldn't be forced into government custody without evidence of danger to herself or others. It was a victory, but it cost them their privacy completely. Now everyone knew who Emma was, where they lived, what she could do. They had to move again, this time to a small town where Dr. Chen had connections, where the local community agreed to protect Emma's privacy, in exchange for her occasionally helping with medical cases at the local hospital. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than the alternative, better than running forever, or living in hiding. Emma adapted to her new life with the resilience that had always amazed Sarah, made new friends, joined the school soccer team, kept up with her studies while also working with Dr. Chen to better understand and control her abilities. They discovered that Emma could now heal from a distance of a few feet if she concentrated hard enough, that her ability had evolved as she'd grown older and gained more control over it. This meant she could help people without the physical contact that had always been necessary before, could maintain better boundaries while still using her gift. By the time Emma was 16, she'd helped over 100 people, each one a deliberate choice, each one a story that Sarah kept documented in leather-bound journals because she wanted Emma to remember that every healing was a person, not just a statistic. Emma read these journals sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep, and Sarah would find her daughter crying over the stories of lives changed, families reunited, dreams rescued from the edge of impossible. These were the moments when Sarah knew, despite all the fear and struggle and impossible choices, that she'd done right by her daughter, had protected her, while also letting her become who she was meant to be. The day Emma turned 18, she sat down with Sarah and said she wanted to expand her healing work, wanted to find a way to help more people without burning herself out, wanted to train others to identify cases where her specific ability could make the most difference. Sarah listened to her daughter, now a young woman, lay out plans that were thoughtful and careful, and showed the wisdom of someone who'd spent her whole life balancing an impossible gift with an ordinary need to be human. They worked together to create a foundation, funded by donations from people Emma had healed and managed by Dr. Chen, that would coordinate Emma's healing work and support research into abilities like hers. It wasn't the life Sarah had imagined when she first pushed that stroller through the subway platform 18 years ago. Wasn't anything close to normal, or simple, or easy. But watching Emma at the Foundation's first public event, speaking to a room full of people about hope and healing, and the responsibility that comes with extraordinary abilities, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. Her daughter was strong and kind and careful, had learned to protect herself while still being generous with her gift, had become exactly the kind of person the world needed. And it had all started with a moment of compassion on a crowded platform, with a choice to acknowledge someone else's suffering instead of walking past, with a baby who'd reached out tiny hands toward a man in a wheelchair and changed everything. Sarah often thought back to that morning, how different her life would have been if she just walked past Marcus like everyone else had, if she'd ignored the man in the wheelchair and kept her head down and minded her own business like the rest of the world. She would have stayed in her tiny apartment, struggling to pay rent, working endless shifts at the coffee shop, while Emma grew up without the resources or support she needed. She never would have met Dr. Chen, never would have understood what Emma was capable of, never would have learned how to protect and nurture her daughter's extraordinary gift. But she also would have been spared the fear, the constant vigilance, the sleepless nights wondering if she was making the right choices, if she was protecting Emma enough or exposing her too much, if she was being a good mother or ruining her daughter's life. These thoughts still kept Sarah awake sometimes, even now that Emma was grown and capable of making her own decisions, even now that they had systems in place and security measures and legal protections. The foundation grew quickly in its first year, attracting attention from medical professionals who wanted to understand Emma's ability from a scientific perspective, and from people desperate for healing who'd exhausted every other option. Emma insisted on personally reviewing every case, reading the medical histories and the personal stories, making her own decisions about who she would try to help. She developed criteria that surprised even Sarah with their thoughtfulness, prioritizing cases where conventional medicine had failed completely, where the person's suffering was preventing them from living any kind of meaningful life, where a healing would have ripple effects beyond just the individual. Emma turned away wealthy people offering enormous sums of money for healings their expensive doctors could have handled, turned away cases where the injury or illness was recent enough that natural healing might still occur, turned away anyone who seemed more interested in the spectacle of healing than in the actual relief from suffering. This selectivity created its own problems, with people accusing Emma of playing God, of deciding who deserved healing and who didn't, of being cruel and elitist and heartless. Sarah watched her daughter handle these accusations with a patience that made Sarah's heart ache, Emma explaining over and over that her ability had limits, that using it depleted her, that she had to make impossible choices because she couldn't help everyone no matter how much she wanted to. The foundation hired ethicists and medical professionals to help Emma develop fair criteria for selecting cases, trying to remove as much subjectivity as possible. But in the end, Emma's empathy was still the deciding factor. If a case moved her, if she felt that pull she'd described as something between instinct and compassion, she would help regardless of what the criteria said. This led to some controversial decisions, like when Emma chose to heal a convicted criminal who'd been paralyzed in prison, arguing that suffering was suffering regardless of what someone had done, or when she healed an elderly woman who only had months to live anyway, saying that those months mattered and deserved to be pain-free. These cases brought more criticism, more protests, more people claiming that Emma was misusing her gift or making morally questionable choices. Sarah defended her daughter publicly while privately wondering if Emma was taking on too much, if the weight of these decisions was too heavy for someone so young to carry. They had conversations about it late at night, mother and daughter sitting in the kitchen of their secure apartment, drinking tea and talking about the impossible burden of having the power to ease suffering, but not enough power to ease all suffering. Emma confessed that sometimes she wanted to run away from it all, wanted to go somewhere remote where nobody knew who she was or what she could do, wanted to live a normal life without the constant weight of other people's pain pressing down on her. Sarah told her daughter that running away was always an option, that Emma didn't owe the world her gift, that she could choose herself over everyone else, and Sarah would support that choice completely. But they both knew Emma wouldn't run, couldn't run, because her empathy was too strong and her sense of responsibility too deeply ingrained. It was who Emma was at her core, this person who couldn't ignore suffering when she had the power to alleviate it, and trying to suppress that would be like trying to stop herself from breathing. The Foundation's second year brought new challenges when a group of scientists published a paper theorizing about the biological mechanisms behind Emma's ability. The paper included details that could only have come from someone with access to Emma's medical records. Dr. Chen launched an investigation and discovered that one of the researchers they'd trusted had been secretly copying Emma's test results and selling them. The betrayal hit Emma hard, made her question whether she could trust anyone outside her inner circle. Sarah watched her daughter struggle with the realization that some people saw her as a research subject rather than a person. They fired the researcher, tightened their security protocols, and Emma refused to participate in any more medical studies for months. Emma's ability continued to evolve as she matured, becoming more nuanced and controlled. By her 19th birthday, she could sense injuries or illnesses in people nearby without touching them, could feel pain radiating from others. This development was both a blessing and a curse, because it meant Emma couldn't turn off her awareness of suffering. Every trip to the grocery store became an assault of other people's pain, all of it washing over Emma in waves that left her exhausted. She learned meditation techniques to help filter the sensations, learned to build mental walls between herself and others' suffering. But the constant effort took its toll, and Sarah noticed her daughter becoming more withdrawn. The Foundation expanded its scope in the third year, bringing in other people with unusual abilities. There was a man who could influence pain perception in others, a woman who could accelerate natural healing processes, a teenager who could identify diseases before symptoms appeared. Together, they formed a network of people with healing-adjacent abilities. Emma thrived in this community, finally finding people who understood what it was like to have an ability that set you apart. She formed close friendships with these other gifted individuals, and Sarah watched her daughter open up in ways she hadn't since childhood. But the foundation's success attracted unwanted attention from organizations that saw these gifted individuals as resources to control. There were attempts at infiltration by pharmaceutical companies, by governments, by religious groups. The foundation's legal team spent countless hours fighting off these incursions. Emma became more politically active, speaking publicly about the rights of people with abilities, advocating for laws that would protect them from exploitation. She testified before congressional committees, gave interviews to major news outlets, became a public figure. Her advocacy work brought positive attention to the foundation and helped pass legislation protecting people with unusual abilities from discrimination. The foundation celebrated its 5th anniversary with a gala that brought together everyone Emma had ever healed, along with supporters and allies from around the world. Marcus was there with his wife and son. Lily was there with her parents. The firefighter and the teacher and the musician were all there. Dozens of people whose lives had been fundamentally changed by Emma's touch. They shared their stories, talked about what they'd accomplished since their healing, how Emma's gift had given them a second chance at life. Sarah listened to these testimonials and felt overwhelmed by the weight of gratitude in the room, by the realization that her daughter's ability had created ripples that spread far beyond the individual healings. Emma gave a speech that night about the future of the foundation, about plans to expand their network of gifted individuals, about her vision of a world where healing could reduce suffering on a larger scale. Sarah watched her daughter lay out these ambitious plans and felt a sense of awe at how far Emma had come from that baby reaching toward a man in a wheelchair. The speech ended with Emma thanking Sarah publicly for the first time, for protecting her when she was vulnerable, for letting her use her gift when it would have been easier to hide it, for always putting Emma's well-being first, even when it meant making unpopular decisions. Sarah wasn't prepared for this acknowledgement, wasn't prepared for the emotion that choked her throat as Emma looked at her with love and gratitude. After the gala, they sat together in the quiet of their apartment, and Emma told Sarah that she'd been offered a position at a major medical research university to study healing abilities full-time. It was an incredible opportunity, but it would mean moving across the country. Sarah's first instinct was to panic, but she looked at Emma's excited face and knew what she had to say. She told Emma to take the position, to pursue this opportunity, to trust in everything they'd built together. Emma moved to the university 2 months later, and Sarah stayed behind to run the foundation. The separation was hard, but Emma thrived in her new environment, conducting research that pushed the boundaries of medical understanding, using her ability more strategically than ever before. Sarah visited regularly and watched her daughter present findings at conferences, saw Emma's name on published papers, witnessed her daughter becoming not just someone with a gift, but someone who understood that gift deeply. The foundation continued to grow under Sarah's leadership, serving more people with abilities, providing more healings, expanding its reach. Sarah discovered that she had her own gifts, the ability to organize and advocate and protect, the wisdom that came from years of navigating impossible situations. Years passed, and Emma's research led to breakthroughs in understanding cellular regeneration, discoveries that helped improve conventional medical treatments. She never forgot the foundation, returning regularly to conduct healing sessions and mentor younger gifted individuals. Sarah watched her daughter balance her research career with her healing work with her personal life, saw Emma fall in love with another researcher, and build a partnership based on mutual respect. When Emma got married at 25, the wedding was small and private, attended only by people who'd been part of their journey. Marcus walked Emma down the aisle because Sarah insisted that he was part of their family, that none of this would have existed without that moment on the subway platform when a baby reached toward a man in a wheelchair. Sarah stood and watched her daughter exchange vows and felt the full weight of everything they'd been through, every choice she'd made, every sacrifice and struggle and moment of fear. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she would do it all again exactly the same way. The foundation Sarah and Emma had built continued to evolve and grow, adapting to new challenges and opportunities, always maintaining its core mission of protecting people with abilities while helping them use their gifts responsibly. Sarah eventually stepped back from active leadership, passing the reins to younger people who brought fresh perspectives and energy, but she remained involved as an advisor and advocate. Emma's research continued to yield insights that benefited both conventional medicine and the community of gifted individuals, and she trained a new generation of researchers who approached abilities with respect and wonder rather than just scientific curiosity. When Sarah turned 60, Emma organized a celebration that brought together everyone whose lives had intersected with theirs over the years, a room full of people connected by the threads of healing and hope and human compassion. Marcus was there, now in his 60s himself, still walking on legs that medicine said should never have worked again. Lily was there with children of her own, showing them off to Emma with pride and gratitude. The foundation staff was there. The other gifted individuals were there. Emma's research colleagues were there, all of them gathering to honor the woman who'd chosen compassion over convenience on a crowded subway platform 25 years ago. Sarah looked around the room and saw the impact of that single choice. The way one moment of acknowledging another person's suffering had created ripples that spread wider than she ever could have imagined, touching hundreds of lives directly and thousands more indirectly. Emma gave a toast that evening about her mother's courage, about the impossible decisions Sarah had faced, and the grace with which she'd navigated them, about the example she'd set of putting people first even when it was difficult or scary or unpopular. And Sarah, listening to her daughter speak, realized that the story had never really been about a baby with healing powers or a miraculous ability or a supernatural gift. It had always been about human connection, about choosing to see and acknowledge suffering instead of looking away, about the courage it takes to help even when you don't know what the consequences will be. The ability to heal with a touch was extraordinary, but the ability to choose compassion in that first moment, to push a stroller through a crowd toward someone who needed help, to let a baby reach out to a stranger despite all the risks and unknowns, that was the real gift that had started everything. Sarah realized that every person in this room, every life that had been changed, every family that had been reunited with hope, existed because she had made one simple choice on an ordinary Tuesday morning. She had chosen to see someone who was invisible to everyone else, to acknowledge pain that others walked past without a second glance, to allow her daughter's instinct to reach towards suffering instead of protecting her from it. And that choice, that single moment of human kindness and deep connection, had created a powerful cascade of healing that extended far beyond anything she could have possibly imagined when she first approached that struggling man in his wheelchair on the crowded platform.